Welcome to Dynamic Duo Weekly News, the only weekly news show that always starts out with false flag news, because there's always false flag news. If they didn't do it, we wouldn't have to report it. I guess the mainstream media doesn't think they have to report it, but somebody does, and so, hey, it's a dirty job. But somebody has to do it, and that would be me, your host, Kevin Barrett, and my co-host, Jim Fetzer. Well, this week, the lead false flag story is that a Hindu supremacist false flagger has been elected Prime Minister of India. Narendra Modi has been projected to win. In fact, it's a done deal now. He's the Hindu extremist who allied with the Zionists, has been suspected of being behind a lot of the allegedly Islamic extremist terrorism in India, which is actually a tiny minority of the overall terrorism in India. But he was elected with the help of such rhetoric as his candidate Singh was roaring at his campaign stops, "Those who want to stop Modi have their Mecca and Medina in Pakistan." And he went on to say that all those arrested on charges of terrorism belong to a particular community, meaning the Muslims. Another candidate from the same Hindu supremacist party, Shastri, a close associate of Modi, said, "It's very unfortunate, but the truth is that Muslims alone are terrorists." The truth is that in the last 40 years in India, a tiny fraction of the terrorism has even been attributed to Muslims, and most of that has been false flag. All deaths attributed to Muslims in India in the last 40 years add up to fewer than 1,500, and there are many, many thousands, into the tens of thousands of total terrorism deaths. So we now have a radical Hindu extremist false flagger as Prime Minister of India. He works closely with the Zionists to set up fake Islamic terrorism. Watch out, India! And indeed, second story relating to this, India's Islamic terror is actually mostly false flag. We've had a long history of stories about this. Gareth Porter, a very good investigative reporter, exposed that a recent attempt to frame a journalist and 4 innocent Iranians in a false flag bombing of an Israeli embassy car was completely bogus. The BBC reported that the Hindu extremist holy man, Swami Asamanand, that's a good name, I guess, has been accused of a string of bomb attacks previously thought to be the work of Muslim militants. And the UK Sunday Times headline in November 3rd, 2013 was CIA bin Laden hunter David Headley plotted the Mumbai massacre, which was attributed to Muslims. Headley was a CIA agent, and it was a false flag. So, Jim, now isn't this a little disturbing to have these radical extremist false flag terrorists getting elected to the highest office in one of the fastest growing and the largest country in the world population-wise?
Well, it's fascinating. My impression was it was second to China in population, Kevin. But
No, it's probably ahead of China.
Really?
They're neck and neck. They're neck and neck.
That's dumbfounding. Well, it's amazing to me how the Israelis perpetrate these false flag attacks all over the world. This article cites one about which I know considerable, namely the Israeli bombing of its own embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992. And then when that didn't bring about enough publicity, not enough people were killed, they bombed their own Jewish community center in 1994 to punish Argentina for its cooperation with Iran over the development of the peaceful use of nuclear energy. So, Zionism has an enormous span of activity all around the globe. It's just very sad to see it happening in India as well.
Well, the Hindu extremists have invited the Zionists into Israel to stir up this trouble, scapegoat the country's Muslim minority, whip up hatred of Pakistan, which is a very dangerous thing given that both India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. So let's hope that this Modi turns out to be better than his reputation. You never know how this is going to work out. Nixon and Kissinger went to China, so let's keep our fingers crossed that this isn't as terrible a portent as it might appear. Well, next false flag story. Boko Haram is not the problem. In fact, we're not even sure that Boko Haram even exists. That's not Jim Fetzer and Kevin Barrett on Dynamic Duo Weekly News saying that. That's the New York Times. Jim, were you surprised to see that the New York Times is admitting that Boko Haram may be mythical?
Yes, I was, Kevin. This is really fascinating. I refer to the Times as the Langley newsletter, as our viewers are well aware. So anytime we get a glimmer of what may be a revealing truth, to me it's quite striking and intriguing. And in this case, it looks as though the United States is going to be drawn into, or that this is intended to draw the United States into a Nigerian war on terror. And, how many times are we going to fall for these things? I'm very, very skeptical about all these events, including, of course, the kidnapping of the girls, which is our related next story. So, it's difficult to know exactly how to sort all this out, but my suspicions are profound.
Well, we're seeing all kinds of propaganda everywhere, including on social media sites and the mainstream media, showing us all these pictures of beautiful, cute, little, innocent, adorable African girls, and telling us they've been kidnapped by these evil, crazed Islamic extremists. And we've seen this video of a crazed guy calling himself Abu Bakr Shakau, ranting and raving like he was on drugs. Yet the official pronouncements coming out of Nigeria, Jim, are even more contradictory than what's come out of Boston and Sandy Hook. First, they told us that they'd rescued 129 girls, and then they said there were 121 rescued and 8 were missing, and then they admitted that none had ever been rescued at all. And not only that, there are no actual authenticated photos of any of these girls. We don't have a list of any of their names, and the photos that are floating around on the web are stolen. They're professional photographers in Guinea-Bissau, over 2,000 miles away from Nigeria, took pictures of African village girls, and these pictures were stolen and used in this propaganda about Boko Haram in Nigeria. The only hard evidence that Abu Bakr Shakau is even the leader of Boko Haram is that he says so. According to the Christian Science Monitor, the Nigerian government says that this guy is dead, and yet this video has been produced supposedly showing him ranting and raving. The whole thing, it really stinks to high heaven, and it just goes to show that we need to force governments, including Nigeria's and, of course, the government of the U.S., which has been less than forthcoming about the victims of Boston and Sandy Hook, to be absolutely transparent in these cases, so we can rest assured that these are not false flag events.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's, crying wolf too many times. I mean, they have done so many phony calls. How can we distinguish the real? I've heard reports now that the CIA has advisors in Nigeria and that they are actually behind this as an elaborate psyop. I'm just stunned by the parallels with Sandy Hook, which we shall address momentarily. But, you want to maximize emotional input. Well, slaughtering 20 children, first graders in a school in a high rent district is one way to do it. Another is to kidnap hundreds of girls in a low rent district. It's really stunning what's going on here, Kevin. I distrust it all, especially when we have the bizarre situation that John McCain now is insisting on, that we have to go to war in Nigeria, that we should send troops in there to rescue the girls. I mean, McCain is a classic warmonger, but this is just the kind of tactic that I would expect from those who are trying to get us drawn further in, where Nigeria, of course, has vast natural resources. So, there are those who would use any excuse they have in order to get us in there.
His classic so-called humanitarian intervention. And, of course, that is usually a pretext or a ruse. We all remember how adorable little babies were used to draw us into Gulf War I when the supposed nurse, Nasira, from Kuwait, testified tearfully before Congress that the evil Iraqi soldiers had stormed into the hospital and dashed the incubator babies to death on the cold floors. So poor Nurse Nasira was crying, and the whole Senate, Congress was crying, and the American people were crying and said, "We have to go get Saddam, let's invade." And it turned out the so-called Nurse Nasira was no such person. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador, and she'd been used by the Washington, D.C. public relations firm Hill and Knowlton in a script that they wrote designed to manipulate the emotions of the public. And so when we see these adorable girls being kidnapped by evil Islamic terrorists in Nigeria, and yet there are no photos of the actual girls, no names of the actual girls, no evidence that Boko Haram even exists, according to the New York Times, it looks highly suspicious. And speaking of victims that are used in these horrible stories designed to make us angry and to get us to pursue the policies that our rulers want us to follow. What's the latest on Sandy Hook, Jim? I understand you have some viral stories exposing that event.
Well, it's fairly stunning, Kevin. We have more and more proof that the Sandy Hook school was actually closed in 2008 and then used as a prop or as a stage in 2012. There are students who are going through newspapers in Connecticut and elsewhere that have lots and lots of stories about school events for every other school except for Sandy Hook. Cookie sales, teacher of the year, some special performance by the children, all those kinds of things. So they're abundant for other schools, but none for Sandy Hook, which reinforces the conclusion that, in fact, it was an abandoned school, which we have previously confirmed on the basis of an absence of internet activity, on the fact that it's not Americans for Disability Act compliant, that it was full of all kinds of material being used for storage, that it was actually full of asbestos and biohazards, and therefore was a kind of a toxic waste dump. But over and beyond that, we have now figured out one of the key players in all of this, a fellow named Robbie Parker, whose video from the beginning raised suspicions because he comes out for a press conference shortly after, his daughter Emily has been shot. And what do we find? But he's laughing as he comes out of the building. Then he sees all the press gathered. He stops, pauses, takes a deep breath to get into character, which is a common acting technique. So that now research is revealing that we think we know who this guy was. He's actually a fellow by name of Samuel Travis Delaney. And the article is fascinating because we have so much photographic evidence that tends to support it. Victoria Muramoto did tremendous research on this, and I'm quite convinced that we have identified this man who's an actor, an entertainer. I mean, really, anyone who wants to get up to date has to catch this article. School closed, actors used, Robbie Parker, entertainer, exposed. I encourage you to find it, track it down, read it. It's going viral, climbing the fastest of any article I've ever published on Veterans Today.
Well, if anybody out there is skeptical about whether false flag terrorists hire actors to participate in their events, just Google Harley guy and watch the character, right after the demolition of the trade towers, this guy on a Harley motorcycle is saying, they just fell down because of the office fires. The jet fuel was just too hot. And it's just absolutely obvious that this guy is a bad actor. Robbie Parker, at least before he hyperventilated, didn't appear to be a very good actor either. Well, Jim, what's with the Sandy Hook Memorial being stolen, and they're blaming it on Sandy Hook truthers like you?
Well, let me just add, Kevin, you're absolutely right about the Harley guy. Everyone's scratching their head as to why these two buildings should have, blown apart. I mean, they're being described as collapses, but they're not collapses at all. They're blowing apart in every direction. They're being converted into millions of cubic yards of very fine dust before our very eyes. And then there just happens to be a fellow on the scene who rushes up and says, it must have been the jet fuel that burned so intensely it caused the steel to weaken and then led to a collapse of one floor on another. It wasn't even physically possible, Kevin, but the power of suggestion and the media, by repeating and repeating a story, makes an indelible impression. Those first impressions are crucial. And the Harley guy was there, Johnny on the spot, to convey it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Now,
he's the most obvious example of a crisis actor I've ever seen. So tell us about the mini
yeah,
false flag at Sandy Hook.
very nice. Well, last week, Wolf and I traveled to Sandy Hook. We actually were going to attend the monthly meeting of the Newtown School Board and explain some of our concerns and raise questions with the school board, about which I have published an article entitled The Newtown School Board Meeting and the Meaning of Silence, because they adopted the strategy of being absolutely non-responsive. They had a little form when we came into the meeting that said we are not allowed to ask questions of the school board, but that we can write them out here, and then the school board will get back to us as appropriate. So we did what we could under the circumstances. They had allocated, each speaker only 3 minutes. Wolf used his very good effect, I think, by conveying the importance of the issue, asking why no surge of EMTs, no medevac, helicopter, and so forth. I complimented that as the second speaker by pointing out that the school had some 626 students, that if 20 had been killed, where were the other 600? Because we don't see 600 students rushing out to be evacuated. There were no buses there to take them away. There were no ambulances. It's really astonishing. I also observed, of course, in
Maybe they were kidnapped by Boko Haram and taken to
Kevin, I think you may have solved it. But what happened here, and this is really a wonderful timing. That's how clever these people are, to antagonize the community against our presence. They performed a clear false flag by having a child's memorial to one of the purported victims of Sandy Hook stolen on Sunday before our appearance on Tuesday. Now, just look at the exquisite timing, Kevin. If the story doesn't make it already in the Monday paper, it's sure to make it by Tuesday. This is as obvious as it gets, clearly intended to bias the community against us. And, of course, that very day we had these repeated encounters involving the police, where United Way of Western Connecticut, which has gathered millions upon millions of dollars in donations, which appears to have been done under fraudulent purposes. So I think there's a potential for lawsuits here. We visited the Newtown Police Department, where the ranking officers refused to meet with us. We visited the fire department, where actually one of the firemen not only verbally but physically assaulted Wolfgang. And then in the evening, we were confronted with a strategy of silence. I think this business with the memorial was just an obvious, mini false flag attack to make it clear that the community would be feeling hostile toward us, as though they weren't enough already, because there's a sense of tension in that community, Kevin. No parent came up to us and started to tell us about their child and how they died. There have been no lawsuits. This is highly uncommon. In past shootings, virtually every parent of a child who's been killed has filed a lawsuit. It's virtually un-American not to do that. But as Wolfgang has observed, and others too, it hasn't happened here. The whole thing is anomalous, and I think we're thoroughly exposing what took place, which involved corruption from the bottom to the top. Not only there on the scene, the Connecticut State Police, the members of the school board, but working up to the governor, who appears to have been complicit, Attorney General Eric Holder, all the way to Barack Obama. This was to promote a gun control agenda called Operation Longevity. I spell it out in that article. I encourage everyone to visit it and review it.
Well, it does sound like an Operation Gladio-style event. We do know that U.S. NATO terrorists regularly stage these false flag events to promote a strategy of tension, to force people to rally behind their authoritarian rulers. And yeah, I agree, Jim, that was probably a false flag when they had a Sandy Hook truther supposedly attack the memorial. A sacrilegious act, can you believe it? Attacking the sacred memorial to this horrific event. Well, if they need a Muslim to go spit on their 9/11 museum that's opening in New York in a couple of weeks, I'm available. You'll have to meet my price. But if you want to demonize the Muslim truthers by having a Muslim go and vomit on the 9/11 museum, which is consecrating and mythologizing a genocidal big lie, I will be happy to do it. I will urinate on the 9/11 museum. for the
It's
right price.
just dumbfounding. You know, it's like they have now 50 Holocaust museums all over the world when there are really serious questions that can be raised there. But 9/11 is even more blatant. We have proof after proof after proof this was a fabricated event. The buildings didn't collapse. In fact, two of the planes weren't even in the air that day. The other two used for the flights 93 and 175 weren't taken out of service by the FAA, formally deregistered until 28 September 2005. How can planes that weren't in the air have crashed on 9/11? How can planes that crashed on 9/11 have still been in the air 4 years later? The American people, sad to say, have been played for saps.
It's just disgusting, building these false religions on these murderous deceptions. The people behind this really deserve the worst that could ever happen to them, and I'm sure in the cosmic scheme of things, they will be getting it. Well, another false flag story, U.S. staging nuclear war drill this week. That's right, it's going on right now between May 12th and 16th. They are running B-52 Stratofortresses and B-2 Spirit bombers flying around pretending to drop their nuclear bombs. Each of these planes can hold 16 nuclear bombs. Now, the Strategic Air Command assures us that this nuclear war drill is, quote, not related to world events. Do you believe them, Jim?
How ridiculous can you get? You know, this is so common. Our government has become such a source of lies, deceit, and deception, Kevin. You talk about vomiting. You know, every time we hear a statement from our government, especially about foreign policy, that's my response. This is clearly part and parcel of an effort to take us back to the Cold War era. Remember, with the demise of the Soviet Union in 1990-91, the military-industrial complex needed a new boogeyman. With Israel's advice and compliance, they chose the Muslims in the Middle East so that the U.S. could become involved in dismantling the modern, sophisticated Arab states that posed a counterweight to Israeli domination of the entire area from the Tigris, Euphrates to the Nile. And now it looks as though, since that story has been played out, too many, I think, no longer believe that Muslims had a lot to do with 9/11, if anything at all. They want to resurrect the old boogeyman, Kevin. It's really astonishing now in the new incarnation of Putin and Russia.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we are going to have to rush through our last false flag story here and get to the Ukraine news. We just always have too many false flag stories. They keep coming every week. The first week without a false flag story, I guess we're going to have to fold our tent up, but I don't think that's going to happen. Well, the last false flag story of this week, more questions have emerged about the FBI shooting of the Boston suspect's friend. This guy was executed point blank by the FBI while he was in custody. Jim, tell us about that.
Oh, it's completely dumbfounding, Kevin. This kid was shot repeatedly by an FBI agent who was questioning him about the Boston bombing and an interrogation in an Orlando apartment. I mean, he shot him like 7 times, claimed he was attacking him with a broom handle. That's all quite ridiculous. I think it's obvious this friend was not going to change his testimony, that the brothers had nothing to do with the bombing. And no doubt that the younger brother wasn't even the person who was being arraigned in the courtroom, so they shot him. I mean, this is disgusting, Kevin. But the FBI has played historically a role in covering up crimes committed by the government, not solving them.
Well, that's right. And this may be related to the tension with Russia over Ukraine, in that they're trying to blame the Boston bombings now on the Russians. Well, this week we had more acceleration of the crisis in Ukraine. The Lugansk and Donetsk regions voted for self-determination with 70% turnout and 90% of the people voting to leave Kiev. And Kiev's troops rolled through eastern Ukraine in a bid to disrupt the voting. They brought in armored personnel carriers and helicopters trying to stop this vote. Jim, do you think that the Ukraine crisis is going to continue to roll on, and where's it all going to lead?
Well, we now have reports, Kevin, of some 400 U.S. mercenaries in the Ukraine. It's completely outrageous. Where it's going to end, it may be war indeed. I mean, this is very, very bad, and I'm profoundly troubled by it. It's just the kind of thing that John McCain and the other super hawks want to have happen. And the fact that these are mercenaries, Kevin, is particularly troubling. Mercenaries aren't under normal military command and control. Mercenaries tend to kill anyone they want, commit rape and pillaging, and it's disgusting that the United States is resorting to any of these kinds of forces, but it became very popular with the government because they don't count them in terms of the number of troops that are committed, so that when we had a max of, say, 500,000 troops in Iraq, I would say with a similar number of mercenaries, we were probably closer to 1 million. And now we got 400 elite mercenaries there from Academy, formerly Blackwater. This is a very, very bad, very troubling development.
And what are we doing in Ukraine anyway? What's the U.S. interest there? Well, Stephen Snagosky says that it's actually dual citizen neocon pro-Israel people who've pushed us into Ukraine, even as Israel is now getting better relations with Russia, including economic and military ties. So Snagosky thinks that this is all an Israeli strategy to set the U.S. and Russia at each other's throats for the benefit of Israel. Who knows? You can check it out by going to my website, truthjihad.com, going to the radio link, and listening to my radio interview with Mr. Snagosky. Well, man bites dog. Israeli speaks truth. That was the screaming headline when a former Israeli nuclear head said that Iran will not have the bomb for at least 10 years if they even want one. It's great to hear the Israelis speaking the truth for once.
Yeah, I agree, Kevin. And by the way, I thought your article was wonderful about neocon psychos blow up Ukraine. I encourage everyone to read it. Netanyahu has for years, made himself the Chicken Little of the Middle East by claiming that Iran was about to, bomb the world, attack the United States. It was all completely ludicrous. To have any degree of truth coming from Israel about an issue of this magnitude is quite a striking development, and I applaud it.
Okay, in tyranny news this week, well, we did hear that the NSA spied on the heads of state of many countries in order to manipulate those countries into voting for Iran sanctions. We also learned that the NSA kills people based upon metadata. NSA General Counsel Stuart Baker said, quote, metadata absolutely tells you everything about somebody's life. If you have enough metadata, you don't really need content. And General Michael Hayden, former director of NSA and CIA, called Baker's comment, quote, absolutely correct, and added that, hey, we kill people based on metadata. They gleefully brag about killing people based on who they think that they're emailing and calling. Somehow,
at the same time, Kevin, they were seeking to reassure the American people that none of this surveillance posed any threat to them because they weren't actually reading the contents. They're applying a technique well known to social scientists of sociograms, where you diagram the relationship between figures, put various dots on a page, for example, representing individuals, and then draw lines of communication between them. And it's very easy to establish who's at the hub of those centers of communication. So that,
we all have 7 degrees of separation from everybody on Earth, including the terrorists. They might as well just kill us all, which is what it looks like they're planning to do with their upcoming nuclear war over Ukraine. Well,
you got that right, Kevin.
That's right. And if that doesn't kill us off, how about this 10-foot sea rise? If you live close to the ocean, you're going to get swamped sometime in the next couple of centuries, according to the latest studies. So, Jim, this fits in with your very controversial take that global warming is real.
Well, Kevin, some 80% of the world population lives in close proximity to the oceans, so that if there's a huge rise, it's going to be catastrophic for most of the world's population. I mean, this is extremely serious stuff, and it's just amazing that it's not getting more attention.
Well, that's right. And this scientific study, actually, if you read it closely, you read the fine print, you'll see that this isn't just about human carbon, carbon-based global warming. It's actually part of a long-term process that's going to happen anyway. Even if we stopped outputting fossil fuel carbon into the atmosphere tomorrow, it would still happen. We could maybe slow it down a little bit, but we couldn't stop it. And even if we use all the carbon we possibly can, the highest end projections, that will only make this sea level rise happen a little bit faster. So that was the small print that Al Gore probably didn't want to tell you. Well, next story, this is a kind of a dubious story, Jim, coming from the Turner Radio Network. Hal Turner is a racist FBI stooge and informant, and nothing at his site can be trusted. But he tells us that there's a new anti-gravity craft with pulsed plasma weapons out there. What do you think about that?
Well, even dubious sources can nevertheless speak the truth from time to time, just as you had that Israeli expert acknowledging that Iran won't have a bomb for at least 10 years. In fact, Iran isn't even pursuing it. Frankly, this looks to me like it's probably authentic. I do believe there's a new class of anti-gravity weapons. There's speculation that, very sophisticated technology was used in destroying the Twin Towers, possibly positron bombs that have some similar properties. But this looks to me like it's actually an accurate report, Kevin, about a new class of weapons, anti-gravity craft with plasma weapons. So it would not surprise me.
Well, it would surprise me a little bit if Hal Turner's the one who breaks this huge story. On the other hand, it could be true, and they could be feeding it to us through Hal Turner to make us doubt it. I mean, that's how they do these things. They put a lot of true material in the X-Files just to confuse everybody, blur the line between fact and fiction. So who knows? And speaking of a who knows story, how about this one? One of my favorite headlines of all time. Ex-Pope warns of alien agenda in the Vatican. I mean, just having an ex-Pope is weird enough. But when the ex-Pope warns that there's an alien agenda at work in the Vatican, well, that makes me and the National Enquirer sit up and take notice. Benedict, former Pope Benedict, is warning about an alien agenda in speeches in Germany, at least according to the Giza Death Star website, which is not as unreliable as the name might suggest. So the question is he referring to a sort of human alien agenda, that is non-Catholics like the Masons sneaking into the Catholic Church and running sex rings and blackmail and money laundering rings like we know they do? Or is he talking about non-terrestrial or non-human aliens? There has been a long history of speculation about the Catholic doctrine with respect to ETs. And, of course, there's a long history of discussion of Catholics and spiritual and demonic entities. So we'll leave you with that one. Jim, if the aliens land at the Vatican this coming week, we will report it on Dynamic Duo Weekly News next week, won't we?
You got it, Kevin.
All right. Well, see you all then.